Today's daf is Chulin daf Tzadik Hey, and we are at the very last line on daf Tzadik Dalid Omid Beis Hahu Tabocha. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Shlomo ben Chaya Leah, Yisrael ben Adina, and David Moshe ben Yehudis Rachel. Today's daf is also being learned Le'ilu Nishmas Moshe ben Tzvi HaKoyen. So we're moving along in Perek Gid Hanoshe. The previous daf discussed halachos related to a Jewish butcher who has meat that is a treifa. Shechted the animal, turns out it's a treifa. Do we have to be concerned that he might have sold it to an Ovid Kechavim, which is certainly within his right to do, but point is, maybe now I would not be able to buy meat from the non-Jews that sell meat out of concern that maybe they purchased the meat and it's a treifa. The bottom line is, that's the general backdrop of the end of yesterday's daf that segues immediately into today's daf. Says the Gemara, there was a butcher that told his friend, Ihavis Paisis Minoi, had we gotten along? Rashi says these two people clearly did not get along. In fact, Rashi says Soinim Hoyu Zelazeh. They literally hated each other. So he tells him, if we were buddies, Miloi Safilach Mishar Shal Patim Davi Esmal, would I have not invited you to the party that I made last night, and would you have not been able to get a piece of fat meat that I was serving to all my guests? In other words, I'm the kind of guy it's kedai to be friends with, he tells him, because had you and I been on good terms, you would have been partying together with the rest of us, and it's a chaval that you missed out. Either way, amalei. So the friend who heard this little taunt told him back, you think I didn't eat from your meat? Achli mishufri shufri. I ate from the best of the best. Amalei. So the person told him, Minalach, what are you talking about? Amalei, the Zavin Ploni Ovikechavim Vesafali. Because I heard that Ploni Ovikechavim bought some of your meat, and he gave it to me. So I ended up eating from your very chashiv cut that you're very excited about. Amalei. So this person went and he told his friend, Trey Avdi, I have to tell you that I actually had prepared two such shvarim, v'hahu treifa, and the one that I gave the Ovid Kechavim was not even kosher, it was a treifa. So not only did you not get the shufri, but the meat that you ended up eating was a treifa. So these are two people that don't like each other, and they're trying to shtach each other in any way possible. So this first guy, let's call him Reuven, goes from telling him that you missed out on a good party to telling him, oh, by the way, your dinner last night was a treifa. But after the dust and the smoke settled on this little duel, there was a halachic shaila that arose. And that is that it seems that this person, Reuven, had claimed that he sold meat to an Ovid Kechavim. The meat was a treifa, and this Ovid Kechavim is out in the shuk, and he's giving it and he's selling it to people. The question is, do we now need to be concerned that perhaps there's a lot of meat in this shuk that's not kosher meat? Now, the metzius was that most of the butchers that lived in this zip code were kosher butchers. And as a result, based on the halachas of Rav, you're allowed to assume that if you're going to go into the shuk, probably the meat that you're going to be buying is going to be kosher meat. And by the way, even if you bought the meat from a non-Jew, based on yesterday's daf, you're allowed to assume that the meat that you're buying is going to be kosher, because even though you're allowed to give a treifa to a non-Jew, but you're not going to give a treifa to a non-Jew when you know there's a concern that he may resell it now to a Jew. But being that there's this one guy, this Chevraman, who's claiming that he violated what we would consider to be the norm, maybe all of a sudden now, Madaf Chayeshdain, and maybe nobody should be allowed to buy meat in this shuk, Al Koponim, from the non-Jews, based on the concern that maybe this non-Jew is selling meat that's not kosher. And again, even though we're going to assume that if most of the butchers are Jewish butchers, so based on that, most of the meat should be kosher meat. But the minute there's a concern that maybe there's a Jewish butcher who sold treif meat to this non-Jew, maybe all of a sudden there has to be some sort of chashash. So this shaila was brought to the great Rebbe. And Amar Rebbe Paskind, he said, B'shvil shoyta zeh. It's interesting that he referred to him as a shoyta. I don't know if he referred to him as a shoyta because of the fact that he claims that he sold non-kosher meat to a non-Jew, or he referred to him as a shoyta just based on the first part of the story, the way he's going after his friend. But the bottom line is, Rebbe said, because of this shoyta, who acted improperly in that he sold basar treifa to an Ovik Chavim, anu neser kala makulin, are we going to say that now all of a sudden nobody is allowed to buy meat from this shuk? There's no way in the world that that's going to be. Meaning, even though I trust that that's what happened, but at the same time, that's not going to passel the entire shuk. Says the Gemara, Rebbe l'tamei, Rebbe was l'shitasi. The Amar who said makulin b'tabachi Yisrael. In the event that you have a makulin, so a makulin is a shuk where most of the people that sold food or weirs or whatever was there were non-Jews. But to the extent that you have makulins, you have all these meikrei basar that are non-Jews. But the butchers that supply them the meat are Jewish. They're tabachi Yisrael basar nimtzi abdeiv k'chavim muter. If you go there and you want to buy meat, the halacha is it's going to be okay. So being that Rebbe L'Shitasi holds that you're allowed to buy meat from makulin, although the meichrim and the makulin were of the kechavim, as long as the tabachim were Yisraelim. So Rebbe holds that ordinarily you're allowed to go basar roiv tabachi Yisrael. And even though, again, this is a very important point, even though maybe when it comes to the treifas, the tabach Yisrael sells it to the guy because it makes a lot of sense he would do that. But again, that's yesterday's daf. He wouldn't do that because he doesn't want to go ahead and be machshel yid. It's for that reason Rebbe's shita is that basar nimtza biyad Ovik Chavim is mutter. So it's for that reason Rebbe Paskin, in this case, it's going to be mutter as well. There's a few Tosfos on this Amid that explain Pashut Pshan in the Gemara. So we don't always think of Tosfos as explaining Pashut Pshan in the Gemara, even though, if you cut through the lumdis, Roiv, Tosfos, and Shas, maybe even more than Roiv, are literally being mefarish the Gemara in the same way Rashi is being mefarish the Gemara. But the bottom line is that Tosfos over here on the top of the Yom, it says that that's Pasha, that even though Rebbe said that B'shvil shoyt zeh she'asa shleika haygin anu neser kala makulin, he only meant that you don't have to be concerned that maybe this guy sold to another guy, and maybe there was another yid that sold to a guy. But Avada Gevist, as it relates to this Moicher Ovik Chavim, Meicha Shmiya Bay, we'd have to be concerned, and you would not, at least for that day, when you're concerned that the meat that this guy bought, he's going to sell, right? There's an expiration date on meat. You don't have to be worried in a month from now. But at least for that short period of time, you would not be allowed to buy from this Ovik Chavim because of the chashash that maybe he takabot a treifa from this. So again, Rebbe believes that this is what happened. But at the same time, he says it's not enough to go ahead and disqualify and suddenly say you're not allowed to buy from this makulin at all. As it relates to the makulin, Roiv Tabach Yisrael, and we're not concerned that maybe the Tabach Yisrael went and he sold the treifa to Ovik Chavim. This Ovik Chavim, where there's a yid that and I'm not telling you to eat this person's meat. Wait until you know for sure that behemoth's gone, and then you'll be able to purchase from him as well. What Rebbe meant was that as it relates to all the other moichrim, from them certainly you would be allowed to buy, and this again is Rebbe L'Shitasi. Ikeda Amri says the Gemara. It's a great story, but there's actually another version of it. Amar Rebbe said when he heard the dispute and this little back and forth that took place with these two people, so his response was a little different. He said, "Mepnei shoyta zeh." This part is the same. He referred to him as a shoyta, whose intention was merely just trash talk, right? He's just here to shtech his friend. Anu neser kol makulin. Are we going to go ahead and we're going to say that the entire makulin is going to be aser? Now, what's the subtlety? The subtlety is, it sounds like from Rebbe's language in the second version that Rebbe doesn't really trust this person. What is he trying to do? He's trying to be mechaven letzura lechavre. In the first version, bishvil shoyte zeh she'asa shleika haygin, Rabbi trusted him. He believed that he sold the treifa to the Ovik Chavim. In this version, it doesn't even sound like he trusts him. He's just trying to win an argument, and people sometimes say things that are not even true, you think, in order to win an argument. So therefore, Rebbe in the second version didn't even believe him. He said, I think his whole kavanah was Litzur L'Chavre. Says the Gemara, what's the obvious thing? It sounds like the only reason Rebbe is not concerned now about going and buying meat in this shuk is because he doesn't trust the guy. But let's say he believed him, also would be also Freit the Gemara, Akasha. So what was a raya in the first Lishna is Akasha in the second Lishna. In the event they have these makulim, that's this shuk with the Chavim used to sell meat, and they used to get it from butchers that were Roiv Yisraelim. If you would find basar over there, it would be mutter. What do you see? What you see from there is at the end of the day, you always go basar Roiv. So, Steinus the Gemara, why is Rebbe saying that the reason I'm not worried about buying from this shuk is because I don't believe that the story even happened. I think he was just coming litzur l'chavre. Even if he would believe it, at the end of the day, okay, so don't buy from this one guy. But at the same time, to go ahead, anu nesa the entire shuk, Rebbe l'shetasi, it shouldn't be a problem. And for the Gemara, shani hacha, there's chazik yisur. And over here, it's already different. Because being that over here was this chazik yisur, here you know for sure, to the extent you would have trusted him and you would believe him, that he sold a behemoth that was a treifa to an oivik kechavim. So now there's a reisa in the entire shuk. Once there's reisa in the shuk, then Rebbe sees it differently. If there's no reisa in the shuk, Rebbe says makulim v'tabachi Yisrael basanim tzaviyadav kechavim muter. But reisas are a big deal in the world of roivs and chazakas. And even though it's one shmeiger, I don't care. At the end of the day, one guy sold one behemoth to one oivik kechavim. That's enough of a reisa that it's going to go now and it's going to undermine the entire roiv in the shuk. And that's why Rebbe said it's only because I don't believe the guy that the halacha is that it's okay to buy. But had he believed him, even though there's a roiv, it would not have been okay. Another point that Tosfos speaks out as he goes through the Yomid is that according to Rebbe in the second Lishna, if somebody wanted to buy, even from that one guy, it would have been okay, right? We have two Lashonos in terms of what Rebbe's reaction was. Again, you have person who we named Ruvain, who claims to have sold a behemoth treifa to an oived kechavim. And Rebbe's not impressed. Rebbe says, B'shvil shoyte zeh, ... Now we have two Lashonos of what ... is. In the first Lishna, B'shvil shoyte zeh, she'asa shaloi kahoigin, anu neser kol hamakulin. In the second version, B'shvil shoyte zeh, de'ichaven letzur lechavrei, anu neser kol hamakulin. So Tosfos is nafkamina between the two Lashonos. According to the first Lishna, it's only kol hamakulin that is going to be mutter. But to buy from this oivik kechavim, as long as there's a concern that he's still selling this meat, is not going to be okay. According to the second Lishna, it's not only anu nesa kol hamakulin, it's even this guy. He too, if you would want to buy from him, you'd be allowed to buy from him. And the reason is because in the first Lishna, Rebbe believes that this Ruvain sold the behemoth treifa to an oivik kechavim. He just feels that it has no impact on the rest of the makulin. In the second Lishna, Rebbe doesn't even believe him. He thinks he's just taunting him. He's saying it to win an argument. But really, it never happened. Again, what's the nafkamina if you'd be allowed to buy from that one oived kechavim? Either way, this concludes the very brief first part of today's daf, part 2. And part 2 of today's daf is a classic. And as we'll see, by the way, as we go through the daf, b'siyata d'shmaya, today's daf is an absolute classic. We could have said this on the onset. And it's true from a halacha perspective, and it's also true from an agada perspective. But the halacha first. My Rav said, one of the most famous one-liners in the entire Maseches Chulin, and maybe even in Shas, basar, as it relates to meat, kivan shenesalam min ha'ayin asar. This is what's known as basar shenesalam min ha'ayin. So what does it mean, basar shenesalam min ha'ayin? You have kosher meat. Everything was done 100% properly. But it was nis'alam min ha'ayin. There was a brief period of time, Rashi says a sha'achas, when nobody saw this meat. Right? And we see the meat, we masiach das from it. That is enough, says Rav, in order for it to be asa. I think it's kedai to go along with the theme that we laid out, and that is learn another Tosfos. So this Tosfos, it's very short, we'll see it inside. Dibra maschel Rav basa shenesalam min ha'ayin asa. The fourth Tosfos on the Yomid. Says Tosfos, va'afilush bi'ir sheyesh ba roiv tabachi Yisrael. Even if you know most of the meat in this city is kosher, and ordinarily there's a halacha of zil basa ruba. But basa shenesalam min ha'ayin, right now I'm concerned. Why? What's this all about? The chayshina neshema Irvin Aisu nevela meruba da alma v'chalfu. We're worried about the ravens. We're concerned that a raven, literally an animal, might have came and swapped out the meat. He took this kosher meat and he flipped it with a non-kosher piece of meat. And where did he get the non-kosher meat from? Well, he's a raven, right? So you can take it from anywhere. So being that most of the meat anywhere is taka non-kosher, even though most of the meat right here is kosher, but if we're concerned that that's what happened, you have to be worried. And then Tosfos says, v'chumra ba'almahu. It's obvious this is a chumra ba'alma mishum uvda, and it's based on a maisa, the hava kedul kaman, as the Gemara is going to explain. But the bottom line is that the idea of Basash and Salman and Tosfos lays out right away two very important things. Number one, we're going to think the unthinkable. This is like a real chashash rochik. You worried about the ravens. That's number one. Number two, Zok Tosfos, being that this whole thing is a chashash rochik, in the world of what we have to be chayish for, and Sveikah Deiraisa, and Sveikah Derabanan, and Roivs, and Chazakas, and Dusugya Pesach Pasuach, and all these different halachas where we are really, really legitimately concerned about Isurim. This is no shaykhs. This doesn't even get anywhere into that world. It's a chumra ba'alma because of a uvda dahava, which we'll see later in today's daf. Tomorrow's daf is going to be the topic of the next few sugyas over here. But either way, says the Gemara, Rav said, Basar kivon shenis alim min ha'ayin, Asr is going to be us. Right, the Gemara kasha meisvei. Rebbe said, Makulim v'tabachi Yisrael. So this is the memory of Rebbe that we began the daf with. In the event, you have the Makulim. Again, the Makulim is the shuk where the majority of the sellers were Ovdei Kechavim, and they used to sell meat that was supplied to them from these Tabachi Yisrael, from the Jewish butchers. If you want to buy meat from the Ovdei Kechavim, it's going to be mutter. Why? Because you go Basar Roiv Tabachi Yisrael, and there's no concern that the Yid would have sold the treifa to the Ovdei Kechavim because he doesn't want to be machshel the Yid who's going to maybe end up buying it from him in the Makulam. Aber fragt the Gemara Akasha, without really explaining what the kasha is. What's the kasha? The kasha is, why is this better than Basar Shenis Salman Ayin? If there's a halacha, Basar Shenis Salman Ayin is a problem, so there was no Yid that was watching the meat. It's literally in the geschäft of the Ovdei Kechavim. So how could that be better, freit the Gemara, than Basar Shenis Salman Ayin? So if Basar Shenis Salman Ayin is Asr, how could this not be Asr? And for the Gemara, the obvious teretz, Nimtza b'yad Ovdei Kechavim shani. What do you mean? There's an Ovdei Kechavim that's watching it. We trust Ovdei Kechavim, so that's not Basar Shenis Salman Ayin. And again, Tosfos said, what was the chash Basar Shenis Salman Ayin? Again, it's based on the sugya. It's because you're worried about the Irvin. Okay, so if you're not worried about the Irvin, the Ovdei Kechavim is going to protect the meat that he wants to sell from the ravens, just like the Yid would. So says the Gemara, Nimtza b'yad Ovdei Kechavim is not Basar Shenis Salman Ayin. As a result, it's not a tzushtal. Another gishmaka havamina tashma teisha chanuyos. So there were 9 stores, kulam meichres basar shchuta, that sold kosher meat. The achas, and then there was a 10th that was meicheres basar nevela, that sold basar nevela. But look, somebody went ahead and bought a piece of meat from one of them. He doesn't know which one he bought it from. Sveika yasa, the halach is that you have to be chayish, sveika deiraisa l'chumra, and now let it eat the meat. This is what's known as kol kavua kemechza al mechza dami, ayin Rashi, ayin Tosfos, ubenimtzo. Let's say you didn't buy the piece of meat from the store, but you rather found it sitting on the ground, then you let it go basar roiv. And being that teisha chanuyos is the roiv, and that kulam meichus basar shchuta, says for that reason it's going to be okay. Right? This is the most famous example of kol de parish meruba parish in the entire shas. But straight the Gemara, the kasha, this is a bomb kasha. That case of teisha chanuyos, nimtza holach achar roiv, why is it not basar shenis salman ayin? You clearly don't know where the meat came from, because if you did, you wouldn't even be having the shayla. That means you found a piece of meat literally on the side of the road. So freit the Gemara, how is this not Basar Shenis Salman Ayin? And for the Gemara, Hachanami benimtza b'yad Ovdei Kechavim. This is an incredible ekimta in such a famous case in Shas. You're right. If somebody would be walking on the street and he would just see a piece of meat, that's not Teisha Chanuyos. Because even though from a Rav perspective, you could say call the parish Meruba parish, but there's a whole nother issue, and that is Basar Shenis Salman Ayin. The case is talking about where it was in the hand of an Ovdei Kechavim, and we don't know where the Ovdei Kechavim got it from. Being that you didn't buy it from the store, without creaking into the sugya now of called the parish, Meruba parish, and But being that you yourself didn't buy it from the store, it's not considered kavur kemechzal mechzadami. It falls under the umbrella of called the parish murba parish. But at the same time, it's also not basash and salmanayim because it's under the protection, it's under the shmira of the oivik chavim. It's not in a situation where it's simply lying. But enechanami, if it'd be simply lying on the ground, incredibly, it would not be mutter based on not the din da'iraisa, but based on a chumra ba'alma, Rav's halacha of basnish and salmanayim. Says the Gemara Tashma. Let's take a third stab at it, and this is from a Mishnah in Meseches Machshirin, Matzah ba'basar. So this was a city where there were Yidden and there were Ovdei Chavim that lived. And then somebody was walking in the street and he found Mitzia, he found a piece of meat. And he doesn't know, is it kosher meat or is it not kosher meat? So the Mishnah says as follows, Halech acha roiv tabachim. You go basa roiv, and if roiv of the butchers are Jewish butchers that shech kosher meat, you could assume it's kosher, and if not, not. V'im mevushel, let's say it wasn't just a piece of meat, meaning it wasn't raw, but rather it was already cooked. Then it's not enough to say, oh, most of the butchers. No, because now you also have to know who eats the meat. And if roiv of the oichle basar are ovdei kechavim, then even if roiv of the tabachim are Yisrael, it's going to be a problem. And the reason it's going to be a problem is because being that it's cooked, so you have to figure out who cooked it. And if an ovdei kechavim cooked it, it's going to be bishalakim. You're going to have a whole nother issue. And it's for that reason, it's not going to be okay. But what's the Gemara's kasha? Freak the Gemara. Even if roiv of the oichle basar in this case are Yisraelim, or if roiv of the tabachim are Yisraelim, what happened to basar shenesalim? And this whole case should be dead on arrival. The fact that it was matzah babasar means it was nesalim and ayim. And if it's nesalim and ayim, you can have all the roivs in the world. Why don't you have Rav's halacha? You're going to tell me what do you mean? If you're keeping cheshbon, I already know what the answer is going to be. Hachanami, it's talking about benimtza biyad oivik kechavim. Just like the case of makulim v'tabachi Yisrael, we said, oh, because it was nimtza biyad oivik kechavim, it's not called basan shenesalim and ayim. And teisha chanuyos, we made this incredibly novel kimta. It's talking about where what taka wasn't lying on the ground, but it was biyad oivik kechavim. Okay, so here too we'll say the same thing. Matzah doesn't mean he found it on the ground, even though that's what it sounds like it means. But maybe matzah means in the hand of an oivik kechavim. But the Gemara says it can't be. You know why? Because if that's the case, mevushal halech acha roiv oichle basar, if it's cooked, is the halacha you go basar roiv oichle basar? V'nechsi, ida oivik kechavim nakitle, idi Yisrael nakile. It can't be that that's the way it's going to be. Because to the extent that an oivik kechavim is holding the piece of meat right now, and it's cooked, you would have to assume for sure that he's the one that cooked it. Or if a Yid was the one that was holding it, you would assume that the Yid was the one that cooked it. So from the fact that we say that when it's cooked, you look at roiv, and you don't simply say, well, someone's watching it, someone's holding it, who's that person? Vaisdois, that wasn't the case. It wasn't biyad ovdei kechavim. And this must be matzah ba literally. And if that's the case, for the Gemara, kasha, matzah ba basar, halech acha roiv tabachim, v'mevushal halech acha roiv oichle basar. Why is this not a problem of basar shenesalim ben ayin? And for the Gemara, hachav b'mayaskin, and the case over here was, ba'oimed v'royeyo. The case was where it was taka matzah ba. But the visual is a little different than your classic matzah ba. Usually when you learn the Geilam Metzias, and you find, I don't know, kikara shal nachtaim on the side of the road, you know, you're walking, all of a sudden you trip on something and you look down, wow, lo and behold, machroiz shal dagin. This case was a little bit different. This case was where you saw somebody from the Vatins. This person was a little far away. You saw something fall from him, and you couldn't make out who the person was, and you couldn't even tell if he was a Yid or not a Yid. We won't get involved in how he was dressed, but you can't even tell if he was a Yid or he was not a Yid. And the bottom line is, you got closer and closer and closer, and then you picked it up, and you saw it was a piece of meat. That's what's going to be negayed halacha. But here's the point. It was never basash and a salmanai. Because even though it was matzah, it fell from somebody, and it's for that reason, this is something that is a question of matzah, where we have to go basar right without having Rav's issues. Dr. Gemara, another tashma. Nimtza bigvulin, in the event, and this is also a Mishnah, and this Mishnah is in Mesech Tishkol. Now, the context of the Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah that Rashi quotes, is somebody found a piece of meat in the Azara, in the Beis HaMikdash. That's like a shmak shaila in light of all the kachim, the halachas. So Do we assume that it's kachim? Probably. It's in the Beis HaMikdash. It's in the Azara. There's an issa to bring chulin into the Azara. But is it an oila? Is it a shlamim? Is it a chata? So depending on how it was caught, that's how it's going to play itself out. We need the next part of the Mishnah, and that is Nimtza not Yerushalayim, not in the Azara. It was found in the Gvulin. It was found already outside Yerushalayim. So the halacha is like this: Eivarim, if it was chopped into Eivarim, so you found these big limbs, a foot, a shoulder, a hemtzeis, a beis hakoises, right? If that's the way this was all sorted out, nevelos, then the halacha is you assume it's nevelos. Chatichos, if it was cut like really, really nice, like these carpaccio type slices, so then already mutara is the halacha is it's going to be mutter. What's the svara? The svara is that if it was a varm, nobody cuts a varm, right? You don't sit down at a barbecue on a Sunday afternoon and all of a sudden, here, take a shoulder of an animal. You chop up the meat nicely, you carve it, right? On some level, you're going to cut it up. So if you found a varim on the ground, probably it was in a vela. This was a lekelev tashlich and oisai, and the kelev doesn't sit down with a fork and a knife. He doesn't need the presentation as much as humans do. And as a result, makes sense, that's probably what's going on, and therefore, if you want to eat it, you're not going to be able to eat it. If, however, it was cut up to chatichos, the whole thing is cut up really nicely, so then, a little olive oil smeared on top of it, mutaris, then it's mutter, because then it looks like itaka was mutter. But what's the Gemara's kasha? Fake the Gemara. Again, nimtza begvulin, chatichos mutaris. At the end of the day, why is this not basish in the Solomon? You'll tell me, what do you mean? We just answered this kasha 4 times already. And specifically the last kimta. Maybe it's talking about where, again, it wasn't just matzah. It was matzah where you saw from far that it fell out of somebody's possession. But the Gemara's question is, if that's the case, a varim nevelos amar. Why, if it's a varim, are we going to assume it's nevela? If you find a varim on the side of the road, you could assume it's nevela. But if you see it fall out of somebody's pocket, why would you assume that it's nevela? I would assume that he shechted this animal, he has the varim, he's going to bring it home, and when he gets home, he's going to start carving it up. The fact that it fell from somebody, if it's a varim, I don't think should mean it's an avelatine is the Gemara. Elamai, you must have really, really found it on the side of the road. And afilu hachi chatichos mutaros. Straight to Gemara, gavaldige kasha. How could it be nimtza bigvul and chatichos mutaros? What happened to the halacha, Rav's halacha, abasesh and Salomanayin? And for the Gemara, midi hu taime el Rav. This whole kasha is a kasha on Rav, because Rav is the one that was mechadish the chumrah of Boston Shenes Salomon Ayin. Says the Gemara, Itmar Allah, just so happens that Rav, not shockingly, Rav had a comment on this Mishnah. And if you know Rav's comment on the Mishnah, the Kashna hype nishtun. What did Rav say on the Mishnah? He said, Chatichos mutaros, but he added 2 words, Mishum nevela. What does it mean, Mishum Nevela? He never said Mutaris Bachila. Mutter, that it's not Metame Tumas Nevela. So we know Nevela is also Bachila, it's also Tame. And the way Rav learned the Mishnah is that when we compare and contrast the Eivarim and the Chatichos, it's not regarding Achila. Because even the Chaticha is Asa Bachila. It's with regards to Tumas Nevela. Eivarim is Nevela, meaning it's going to be Mitame Tumas Nevela in addition to being Asa Bachila. Chaticha is going to be Mutaris Mishum Tumas Nevela, but Avad is going to be Asa Bachila. The Levi Amar, by the way, Mutaris Bachila. Levi said it's going to be Mutar Bachila as well. But here's the point, that being that Rav already learned up in this Mishnah that even Chatichas is going to be Asa Bachila, so there's no kasha. In fact, not only is there no kasha, it's probably Rav Lishitasai. Rav that holds Basash and Salomon Ayin is Aser. That's why Rav said Chatichos Asuros Ba'achilo and only Mutaros B'nevela. The bottom line is, the Gemara brought Rav's member. Rav said, Basar Shenes Alim Min Ha'ayin is Aser. What are we worried about? The Arvim. Really? It's a chumra ba'alma. And the Gemara fired away with a whole bunch of ha'aras on Rav, and the Gemara, because of these ha'aras, was forced to make some pretty incredible ekimtas. The first one was from the way we began the daf. Rebbe Yomer Makulim v'tabachi Yisrael basar nimtza biyad avik yechavim mutter. Why is that not basar shen Salomon Ayin? So the Gemara says, no, if it's biyad avik yechavim, that's not basar shen Salomon Ayin. The second one was from the famous brayso of Teisha Chanuyos, and the Gemara made an ekimta, a shocking ekimta, and that is Teisha Chanuyos nimtza halech acharov. Doesn't mean when you found it on the side of the ground. Nimtza means biyad avik yechavim. The point is, you didn't buy it. David Kachavim bought it. That's called Nimtza, called the Parish Meruba Parish, and obviously there's no problem Basar Shal Smanayim because it's B'yad David Kachavim is already going to be different. The third was from the Mishnah Masechtas Machshirin, Matzah. So if it's raw meat, you go basar roiv butchers. If it's cooked meat, you go basar roiv achle basar. The Gemara asks, what do you mean matzah ba? Matzah ba? L'chura, it should be dead on arrival because of the fact that isn't it basar shenes alaminayin. And the Gemara said the case of matzah ba was where you saw it fall from him, you just didn't know who the person was. Was he a yid? Was he not a yid? The bottom line is that's why you have to go basar roiv. And then finally the Gemara asks from the Mishnah Masechtas Shkalim, where again nimtza bigvulim chatichos mutar evarim asuras, but chatichos mutaris. Why is it not basar shenes alaminayin? And all the terutzim the Gemara gave up until this point were not going to work for this Mishnah. And the Gemara said, Ein hachinami. According to Rav, it would be asar. And oh, by the way, Rav actually said that. It was machlekes Rav and Levi had to learn the Mishnah. Rav learned mutaris only means mishum tumas nevela. It's l'shitase because he holds basar shenes alaminayin is going to be asar. Either way, this concludes the halacha part of the balance of the daf. We now turn our attention to a little more agadata, so underrated Perikid Anosh, like one of the most lumdish aprakim in Shas, but it has its fair share of agadata. Either way, says the Gemara of Rav, as it relates to Rav's halacha of basar kivan shenesal min ayanasa la beferish itmar ela b'chlala itmar. You should know Rav never said it baktzena. He never walked into his medrash and said basar kivan shenesal min ayanasa. We know that's Rav's shita, and we know it based on a ma'isa shaya kachaya. Now, this is a theme that, Baruch Hashem, over the years we've mentioned countless times, and that is Rav we know was a shaskin. Rav didn't talk a lot. The Rambam says about Rav, Amra Rav Tamar Rabbeinu HaKadosh Lo Yisach Sicha B'Teilo Kol Yomav. And Rav is the one that said, Lo Olam Yashna Anub Talmid B'Derech Ktsara. So we know that Rav, even when it came to Torah, didn't talk a lot. And that's why the Maritz Chias in the Tshuva says, you find this idea of Had Rav La B'Ferish Itmar, Ela Mechlala Itmar. Because Rav didn't do a lot of talking, and with the Rav, you had to be Medayik. Which, by the way, Rav himself said in Masech Tesukha, Afilu Sichas Chulin Shal Talmidei Chachamim Esrichen Talmud. Rav told you that you have to be Medayik. This Sichas Chulin V'Talmud. This is a classic example, because we're going to have now this huge halach. Again, halach that everybody knows, basar shenes is a reason that when you order takeout, it comes in 19 wrappers. It's based on this halacha. And you should know, it's Rav's halacha, and Rav never said it. It's something that we know. Michlala, what is this? Michlala, says the Gemara. The Rav Havi Yosef, Amaboret de Ishtates. So Rav was once by the crossing of the river Ishtates. Ishtates is the name of the river, and there was a crossing. And Rav is there. And he saw that there was a person that was washing the head of an animal. So he had shechted an animal, and he's holding the head, and he's by the river, and he's cleaning it out. Nafal mineh. And the head, it slipped out of his hand, he fumbled it, and now it's in the Ishtatis River. So this person was very disappointed. Azal Aisi Silta. So, doesn't sound like it's the first time it happened. He goes quickly and he brings his basket, shada, he throws it into the river, asik train. It was his lucky day, and all of a sudden, instead of coming back with one head, he came back with two. Amar Rav said, Avdinami hachi. I mean, does this usually happen? Right, you lose $1, you're trying to find it, and you end up finding two. Usually you just don't find the one, right? So, what's going on over here? So Rav said, there's something a little suspicious. Asrinu nahale. He said, I think both of these heads are going to be asa. The reason is because there's clearly more than one head in the river, and sounds like the East River, but the bottom line is there's clearly more than one head here in the river, and as a result, he said, I don't know where that other head came from, and by the way, therefore even the one might have also came from, I don't know where it came from, and therefore I have to assume both of them are not kosher. Well, let's just explain this a little bit. Had this person come back with this one head, he would have assumed it's kosher. I mean, he dropped a kosher head and he picked up a kosher head, so it's probably the same one. But once he picked up two, so clearly there's something else going on the bottom of the river. Once he knows for sure there's something else going on the bottom of the river, so now I don't even know if that one, meaning maybe there's really three now. So Bekitzer Rav went ahead and Rav said the whole thing is going to be also Amrulay. So the Gemara says that when this story happened, so Rav's Talmidim were there, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi. So Amalei, Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, they both turned to Rav and they said, he said, why would you assume that what they picked up was Aser? And really the question was based on the fact that this was a kosher city. I mean, this was a city where the Olam ate kosher food. And as a result, Roiv Tabachim and Roiv Eichlei Basa were all Jews. So, good. Clearly, there's another head of an animal on the bottom of the river. But why would you assume that it's from a non-kosher animal? Go Basar Roiv and assume that it's fine. Amalusi told him, the Isura Shchichitve. That was his answer. The Isura Shchichitve. And the Olam heard what Rav said, and they knew what Rav meant. You know what Rav meant? Rav meant that although it's true that Roiv of the meat in this area is kosher meat, but Roiv of the meat in the world is not, and being that this meat was Nisalim in ayin, you think it's on the bottom of the river, so nobody's able to see it. It's for that reason we have to be concerned now that maybe meat came from Yenemek Welt, and that's where it came from. Because maybe the meat got swapped out by an Erev. The point is, there's a chashash that the Erev is going to come and he's going to bring meat now from wherever. But here's the point. From the fact that Rav, in a city where most of the meat was presumed to be kosher, and there's halacha that you let her go basar, was still worried. Vaistois, he's concerned of Ruba Da'alma. What do you mean Ruba Da'alma? Where's the Ruba Da'alma's meat coming from? I guess the Erev, that's where it's coming from. Oh, must be, there's a concept of Basar and Salman Ayin, and this is where they came to this. So again, the Gemara says, Rav never said Basar and Salman Ayin is also. You know what Rav said? When this person, this shaykhid, who became a fisherman by the end of the story, went and he plucked out these two heads instead of the one, and Rav said, you're not eating it, because I'm worried about all the meat in the world. What do you mean worried about all the meat in the world? Oh, you're worried about Arvin, must be, there's a concept of Basar and Salman Ayin. Freit the Gemara Kasha. V'chim mechlala mai. The Gemara said, there must be a reason the Gemara said that. It's not just because of good raid. Rav is a shaskin. That's not why the Gemara said it. The Gemara said it because there must be some halachic significance. What would be the halachic significance? If Rav walks into Beis Medrash and he says, Basar Salman Ayin is asur, so it's not debatable. Ken Stein auf den Kopf. Basar and Salman Ayin is us. But if Rab never said it, and it's only Michlal Itmar, so then if you ding sich with the story, meaning if you have a different interpretation of what Rav meant, well then maybe you can argue with the halacha. So the Gemara is saying that you should know, when Rav said this halacha, Basar and Salman Ayin also, he never really said it. It was La B'chlal Itmar, which means, this is the only reason why we made this point, that if you want to argue with it, there is a little makom to argue. So the Gemara wants to know, meaning where is there an opening to say that maybe that's not what Rav meant? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you where, because this port was a port where there were a lot of non-Jews that did business. Meaning this happened by a river, it happened by some crossing. There was a port over there, and there were containers that were coming and going, and there was importing and there was exporting. Now, the city that this port bordered was a Jewish city where most of the butchers were Jewish and most of the meat was kosher, and as a result, based on that, you would not have to be concerned. But at the same time, there was a port, and there's people that are buying and selling, and there's geschäfting coming from all over the place. And it's based on that, you could have argued that maybe when Rav said that I'm worried about Isser, it wasn't because of the Oirev, and based on a concept of Basar Kivish Salman Ayin is going to be also. But he's worried about the chevre that do business in this port. And in fact, the Gemara says, Teid, I'll even prove to you that might have been what Rav meant. Because the Isura Shchichatve, and that Lashon Zok Rashi of Isura Shchichatve doesn't sound like in the world. Shchichi means it's Shchich over here. Right here, there's a lot of the Isura. And it sounds more like Rav is worried about the fact that this is a port that a lot of non-Jews do business in, and therefore you have to be concerned what's coming from elsewhere, not because the Erev brought it, but because the actual Seichrim brought it. But the bottom line is, the Gemara says that's the significance of saying Hadarav La Beferish Itmar Ela Michlala Itmar. Either way, Rav's shita is Basar Kivan Shen Salman Ayin Asa. Freit the Gemara Kasha Ela Rav Heichiyachol Bisra. If that's the case, how is Rav able to eat meat? Why isn't all meat Basar Shen Salman Ayin? Right, the Gemara is asking the simplest question in the world, which, by the way, has some simple answers. But very, very basic. How was Rav ever able to eat meat? Why isn't all meat in the world Basar Shen Salman Ayin? And for the Gemara, first teretz is B'shaite. Rav would watch the Sheichet Shecht and literally hot off the press, that's the way he would eat it. Alternatively, B'tzayir v'chasuma. There was a siman. So tzayir means he would cover it. Chasuma means he would put a seal on it. But the point is, there was a siman, right? The proverbial double wrapper. And that's how he would go ahead and do it. Vinami, or besimana, he would cut the meat. You would have the butcher cut the meat in a way where there was going to be a siman. And the Gemara says there's a precedent for great tzaddikim cutting meat in a certain way. When he would cut meat, he would cut it like a triangle. This is the way he used to cut his flesh. So Rab would do something similar. It's interesting. Rashi says that the reason Rabbi Bar Rav Huna would do it, this is Gemara Bava Metzia, was because he didn't want the people in his house to take his meat, right? He wanted to know which is his piece of meat. So like this, he always had a siman. Rav is worried about Basash and the Salmonayin. But the bottom line is, says the Gemara, whatever, it's a simple question and it comes with a simple answer. So in light of the story that we just told, the Gemara tells another story. Rav was once going to his Edom. Who was Rav's Edom? Rav Chanan. Chazi Mabar the Kasalape. So Rav comes to the port. He's going to take a ferry, a boat, and he's, en route to his Edom. And when he shows up, the minute he came, the train came. Right? So you go to the train station, and Mamish Dam Mazel. The second Rav shows up, all of a sudden, boom, it shows up. Says the Gemara, Amar, he says, today's going to be a good day. Not only is it going to be a good day, I know that when I show up on my Edom, this is going to be a big party. Because in a superstitious way, if you show up to the port, and literally, the minute you show up, the ferry comes, let me buy you didn't get delayed for 4 hours. Let me buy you, they boarded and they took off on time. But fakir, this is a situation where the minute you showed up, boom, you're already up in the air. So this is already a tremendous good omen. Yom Tov L'Gavos. The Gemara says, when Rav came, he was so confident of how the events were going to play themselves out. Don't try this at home. Azal come above us. He comes to his house. He started peeking through the hole. He wanted to see what was going on in the house before he even knocked. Says the Gemara, so he looked through the hole, and he saw there were behemoths, right? This is old school. You walk into a deli. So he saw the behemoths hanging from the ceiling. He knows the get, right? Again, today's going to be a good day. Says the Gemara, no, Taraf Abava. He knocks on the door. Everybody comes out to greet him. The problem was, the butchers also came out to greet him. The entire house, everybody came out. Now Rav sees that everyone's coming out to greet him, right? They're singing Sisa V'Simchi and Oydiniven. They're singing all the Naginim, and everybody's coming out to visit Rav. But Rav was focused. Rav did not take his eyes off the meat. The Gemara says, like Alam Rav Einamine, right? He was making sure the whole time that he was looking at the meat. And Amalu, in fact, Rav told the Olam, Eichu Hashta, Sfisulu Yisru Lebnei Bras. He said, I wanted you to know that were not for me, my Eineklich, right? He's visiting his Edom. My Eineklich would have been eating, they would be eating food that they're not letting eat because I was the only one looking at the food. Everyone was looking at me. I was looking at the meat. Why? Not because of the taiva of the meat, because I didn't want it to be Basash and a Salm and an Ayin. The bottom line is the Gemara says, after this whole story, right? Rav was so excited. He knew there was going to be a big party. And sure enough, there was a big party. And even this was like Basash and a Salm and an Ayin. Says the Gemara, at the end of the day, Rav, when he came in, Rav didn't eat. After all this, Rav said, I'm gonna pass. I'm not gonna eat meat. What did he eat? Maybe fish, right? Rav Tzair Kavra. Rav is very much associated with fish. We've spoken a lot about that over the years. But Al Kopanim, Rav doesn't want to eat me. He says, "Where my time? Why didn't he eat me? After all that, isn't because of Basish and the Salmon. I am. What do you mean? He was focused on the meat the entire time. So we know for sure it wasn't Basish and the Salmon. Ella denachish. Maybe the reason he wanted to eat meat is because he felt that he had acted in a superstitious way. And we know it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to be superstitious. And he felt this was almost like a mitzvah baba aveira. Not literally. But he felt that he did an aveira associated with this meal because he acted in a superstitious way, knowing that there was a good meal that was waiting for him. So he felt, after he did it. You have to know why he did it. But after the fact, he said, you know something, I'm not going to eat from the meat. But the Gemara says it can't be, because Va'amar Rav himself said, Kol Nachash, any person who acts superstitiously, but he doesn't do it in the way of Eliezer Eved Avram, or like Yonis and Menshal, Nachash is not considered Nachash. So again, Nachash loosely translated as superstition, but in a more nuanced way, what it means is somebody says that if this happens, I'll do this. If that happens, I'll do that. A black cat, you walk under a ladder, all these different superstitions and inyanim that we've heard about over the years. Right? That's the general concept. And you're not allowed to do that. A Yid's not allowed to do that. Tamim tiyam Hashem aleikecha. We have a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We don't live our life based on these omens and these signs. The only time we engage a little bit in simanim is B'leir Rosh Hashanah. Simanim Milsi, right? That's the one time where we get involved in this, but that's, again, a whole other Inyan. The bottom line is, Rav stating that said, that a person could do nichush light, right? If you want to be menachish a little bit, that's going to be okay. In fact, kol nachash she'enek Eliezer Avram Yonis and Menshal ene nachash. What was unique about Eliezer Avram and Yonis and Menshal? So we'll focus on Eliezer Avram. That's the more famous of these two stories. Eliezer Avram said very clearly in Parshas Chayesar, if I'm going to come to the city and I'm going to sit by the well and a woman's going to go, I'll know she's, and if not, I'll know she's not. Eliezer made a Tanai de Bnei Gadu Bnei Ruvain. He was very, very clear. He said, I'm only going to act and move forward based on the way the events play themselves out. And being that was the way Eliezer went about this, so that's a nichush that's not okay. So to use a nichush as a sniff lahakel, right, like a paisik sometimes will write a tshuva, and he'll throw in a svara. He says, I wouldn't rely exclusively on this svara, but as a sniff lahakel, I'm going to rely on it. So if you want to use it as a sniff, as an add-on, that's something you would be allowed to do. So Rav, in this instance, right, he didn't say, I'm only going to my Eidim if the ferry... He said, it showed up on time. It sounds like there's going to be a Geshmaka party that's going to arrive when I'm going to get there. But he didn't act or not act based on it. He didn't go all in on this nichush. And because he didn't go all in on this nichush, it's for that reason it's not going to be a problem. The bottom line is, says the Gemara, why did Rav, after all this, not eat the meat? Is it because of Basish and Salmanayan? And if it's because of the nichush, it wasn't nichush because Rav Shita is kol nachash enik Eliezer Eved Avram Yonis and Menshal eina nachash. And by the way, Rav Shita, because he holds kol nachash enik Eliezer Eved Avram is not nachash. That's why he did this in the first place. But the bottom is the Gemara says, I don't understand why Rav didn't eat. And for the Gemara, it was a third reason. El sudas arishus havai. This was a sudas arishus. V'Rav Loi mishani misudas arishos. Rav did not eat from a sudas arishos, and being that this was a sudas arishos, it's for that reason he did not want to eat. It says the Gemara on the note of Rav showing up at the ferry station. The ferry shows up the minute he arrives, and he says, "Wow, this is a good sign," says the Gemara. Rav badik mimabara. Rav used to do this often. This is not the only time he did it. Rav was badik mimabara. He would use the ferry as an omen. Ushmu badik besifra. Shmuel would be badik with svarim. Pasha, what it means is that if Shmuel had a decision and he wanted to know what to do, he would open up a Sefer Torah, Chumash, and he would see, right, hashtag the Geirel Agra, such a concept. Rabbi Yochanan badik biyanuka. Rabbi Yochanan would be badik biyanuka. What does that mean? He would go over to a child and he would say, we'll get back to this in a minute. Says the Gemara, Kulish Shnei de Rav, all the years that Rav was alive, have a Kosavle Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in Eretz Yisrael, Rav lived in Bavel, right? We know Rav had lived in Eretz Yisrael, B'chiyasa Rav Bavel, but eventually he came to Bavel. So all the years that Rav was living in Bavel, while Rabbi Yochanan was living in Eretz Yisrael, so Rabbi Yochanan would write him letters, he would write him briefen, right? Letters. So Rabbi Yochanan would write him as follows. He would address him L'kodam Rabbeinu Shebebavel. He gave him tremendous kavod. He referred to him as Rabbeinu Shebebavel. Kinach nafshe, after Rab passed away. So Shmuel, the younger Shmuel, now became the Gadol of Bavel. So Rabbi Yochanan went from corresponding to Rav, now he's corresponding to Shmuel. But the way he would address Shmuel was, Havikasav l'Shmuel, l'kodam chaveirenu shababavel. So Rav gets the appellation Rabbeinu, Shmuel is only chaveirenu. Says the Gemara, Amar, so Shmuel was a little hurt. He said, Lo yoda li midi de Rabbi Ana. He said, he's not referring to me as Rabbeinu. I'm assuming the reason is because a Rebbe means that on some level you have some knowledge that the other guy doesn't have, right? The Rebbe has a certain knowledge the Talmud doesn't have. So, is there nothing that I know that Rabbi Yochanan's better than me in everything? Because of Shad Alei Ibur the Shitten Shnei. So Shmuel said, I'm going to show Rabbi Yochanan that I know something he doesn't know. So Shmuel sits down and Shmuel writes the cheshbon of the moiled for the next 60 years. He sends him his calendar. Mamish. The Gemara says, when Rabbi Yochanan got it, Omar, he says, you see, he knows math, right? He's a scientist. I'm not that impressed. I mean, Shmuel just begged out a 60 years worth of calendars. The Moilit's going to be, he has it down to mamish the regoyim and the chalokim of the minutin. And I feel Rabbi Yochanan says, okay, mathematician, no. Says the Gemara, Kosnav Shad Alei Tleisa Gamli Sveiki Trefesa. So there's a big shaila, Rashi, Tosfos, Gersayis, what exactly this means. But either way, he sends him back 13, Place even has a Gersa 12, so everything is a question of Gersa here. But either 12 or 13 camels that were laden with Suffolk Trefus. Either way, Amar, Rabbi Yochanan got this. He said, he isli Rab Bevavel. He says, you know something? I have to be honest. I didn't realize Shmuel was so good. I mean, I knew Rav. Shmuel, I know he's much younger. I know everything he says Rav is chaylik with, right? So every now and again, it's like a Rav is Shmuel da Amri Travayu. He knows math. I hear it's impressive. It's important when you learn the sugyas of Kiddush Levana, but I didn't think he's worthy of Rabbeinu. But now that he sent me all these treifa shilas, so I see Shmuel is really holding. So he says, no, if he's so holding, he said, I have to meet him. Ezel achse. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm booking tickets. I am going now to Bavel. Imagine, Rabbi Yochanan's going to Bavel. How many Gemaras would we have? And we have Ki Asar Rav Dimi and Ki Asar Ravin. Imagine Ki Asar Rabbi Yochanan, if Rabbi Yochanan himself showed up to Bavel. Either way, the Gemara says, but before Rabbi Yochanan went to Bavel, Rabbi Yochanan did what he always did, which was Psaikli Psukech. Amali Yanukas, he sees a child, and he goes over to him, and he tells him, Psaikli Psukech. He says, I want to hear a pasuk. Amalesi, he told him a pasuk in Shmuel Aleph, Perich Chav Ches pasuk Gimel. Shmuel Meis. That's what I learned today. Amarsi says, well, if that's the case, Shma Mino Noch Nafshe the Shmuel must have passed away. And that, says the Gemara, is the rest of the story. Not. V'loi hizak the Gemara. Loi shachiv Shmuel. Really didn't happen. Shmuel really didn't die. Elo ki heichid loy litrich Rabbi Yochanan. Unbelievable. In Shamayim, they didn't want to be matrich the great Rabbi Yochanan to have to go to Bavel. So Rabbi Yochanan, who's Avodah was Psaikli Psukech, through this child, they went ahead and they told him what happened, and it's for that reason he never ended up going. Says the Gemara Tanya, Reb Shimon Allah said, Bayis tinoik v'isha, as relates to a bayis, a child, and a woman. Afal pisha ein nachash yesh simen. Even though you're not allowed to be soymech on it 100%, because that would involve already nichush, but yesh simen. What does this mean? So Rashi says, what this means is that once upon a time, there was a superstition that if somebody builds a house and immediately afterwards he gets involved in a business and the business does well, that means he should go all in on that business because for sure he's going to be very, very matzliach. Or if somebody has a child and after he has the child, he gets involved in a business and it does well, that's a sign that he's going to be very matzliach and he should go in. Or if somebody gets married and then he does geschäft and he's very matzliach, again, that's a sign that he's going to do very well. So says the Gemara, you can't rely on this 100%, but yesh simen. Don't mach it back. There is a little bit of truth to it. Amar Rabbi Elazar added to this Yevudas Chazak Klas Zimni, but it's only true if it happens 3 times. Dechsiv, and based on the following pasuk, Yosef einenu, v'Shimon einenu, v'Binyamin tikachu. Right? Who said this? Mi Amar Lami. Right? Yaakov Avinu said this. He says, "What? You're going to go ahead now and you're going to take Binyamin after I lost Yosef and Shimon." You see from here that had Binyamin also been taken, there would have been a chazaka, and therefore, if it happens 3 times, it's not going to be okay. This Gemara, by the way, is a very shver Gemara. Right? First of all, it only happened twice. Yosef einenu, v'Shimon einenu. And by the way, you have to come onto this pasuk to teach me the concept of chazaka. Don't we know the idea of chazaka? I saw a Bruv Margol says Mitzayin the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says Dechsiv ani bevoi mipadan aram mesol Rachel. It was Rachel einenu, v'Yosef einenu, v'Shimon einenu. Now it was already 3. So v'es Binyamin tikachu. So at the very least, it answers that kasha. You find that it was this chazak plus nizimni. Regardless, we are going to end here. So just to speak out a few hours, 2 like really, really short. I want to drop longer. The first one is, so The Gemara said that Kulish need the Rav, as long as Rav was alive, so Rabbi Yochanan would send letters to Rav and he would address him as L'Kodam Rabbeinu Shababavel. After Rav passed away, so now Rabbi Yochanan is no longer corresponding with Rav, now he's corresponding with Shmuel. And he would write him L'Kodam Chavereinu Shababavel. And Shmuel felt that the reason Rabbi Yochanan is calling him Chavereinu and not Rabbeinu is probably because Rabbi Yochanan doesn't think that Shmuel knows anything that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't know. He says, I'm going to show him that I know. And what does he do? He sends him the chushbon of 60 years. And Rabbi Yochanan gets the letter. He says, no, he knows math. That's not a reason for me to refer to him as Rebbeinu. So Shmuel said back, he says, you know something, I'm going to show you I know how to learn. He sent him 13 camels of Suffolk Trefus. And Rabbi Yochanan saw that. Not only was he impressed, he said, I have to meet this yid. And he literally was en route, and they deceived him from Shemayim. The child tells him Shmuel Meis, which obviously meant Shema Minot Nach Nafshei de Shmuel, when in fact Shmuel had not really died. And the bottom line is, says the Gemara, you find this in it. It's actually interesting because there's an idea of if there's a chashash that somebody died, right? A rumor spreads that somebody died when the person's really alive. Say it's a school of Arichas Yamim. And I've heard over the years different stories about different tzaddikim. Most notably Ramei Simcha, right? There was a rumor that spread to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisrael, that Ramei Simcha wasn't alive, and they were hespedim for him, Barabim. Ramei Simcha was Meirich Yamav V'Shan after this. This is a Mefurish Gemara. It happened with the great Shmuel, where Shema Minah Nach Nafshei de Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan must have thought Shmuel wasn't alive. Again, it sounds like he probably stopped sending him letters until, maybe he got another 13 camels full of Suffolk Trefus. But the bottom line is, this is the Gemara. I saw Rabbi Reuven Margolis in his Nitzayt Sayar. It's classic. He has like a long piece over here. I just mentioned the last line. He says, Shmuel is trying to impress Rabbi Yochanan. And he said, I'll show him something that I know Rabbi Yochanan doesn't know. And he sends him back. He said, okay, you know math. You're right. I don't know the Moilid as well as you know. Right? Shmuel was known as Shmuel Yarchina. And the reason he was known as Shmuel Yarchina because he was an astronomer. He knew astronomy. And he knew all these cheshbonos. Right? We said math. It's astronomy. But the point is, because he was so well versed in astronomy, see, he said, I'm gonna flex in an area of chachma that I know I have that for sure Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have. But again, Rabbi Yochanan mamish dismissed it. He was very, very unimpressed. So what did he do afterwards? He sent him Suffolk Trefus. Why Suffolk Trefus? So Rabbi Reuven Margolis, I'll tell you what I think the reason is, because the Gemara said in Chulin Daf Yud that Rava had a son who came and he said a murder de gezach in Trefus, and Rava commented, he said Chakim breed Trefus ke Rabbi Yochanan. My son knows Trefus like Rabbi Yochanan. And the Heilige Rashi brings two pshatim. And one pshat is that Rabbi Yochanan was the world's leading bucky in the world of Trefus. So Shmuel tells Rabbi Yochanan, oh really, you're not impressed? I'm going to show you that I know Trefus better than you. And Shmuel goes ahead and he sends him all these Suffolk Trefus, and it worked because Rabbi Yochanan was so impressed. He was so taken aback that he says, I have to go see him. Shmuel Meis. Either way, that's the first order. The second order is, so the Gemara said Rav Badik Bimabara. Rav, when he was at some sort of crossroad, he would make decisions based on the ferry. Shmuel Badik B'Sifra, based on the Teirah Akdesha, and Rabbi Yochanan was Badik B'Yanuka. And then the Gemara told this story of when Rav passed away, and Rabbi Yochanan is now addressing Shmuel, and he calls him Chavireinu, not Rabbeinu, as a dogma of where you find that Rabbi Yochanan was Badik B'Yanuka. Because before he went to Bavel, he went to a child and he said, Psaikli Psukech, and the child said, Shmuel Meis, and Rabbi Yochanan literally took it as, this must be what happened. Shema Mina Nach Nafshei de Shmuel. It's interesting, the Ramah, in Yeridea, Simin Kuf Ayin Tes. So that's where the Shulchan Aruch talks about all these heebie-jeebie types of things. In Halacha Dalet, says the Ramah, V'chein muter loyma letinek psaikli psukech. You're allowed to go over to a child and say psaikli psukech, and based on what the child says or doesn't say, you would be allowed to make decisions. Meaning, you would have thought that it's usher based on the Simin Kofayin Tes, Heebie-jeebie, Tom Tiamash Amalikacha. We don't engage in these types of things. This is something that you're actually allowed to do. The Vilna Gaon and Bir Agra says, what's the makar to this? The makar is Rabbi Yochanan, our daf, Masechtas Chulin, daf Tzaddik Hey Amid Beis. The Teres Chayim in his Pirush HaMasechtes Bava Basra, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis says, what's the pshat? Why is it mutter? Why did Yochanan do it? Why would this be okay? So he says, I think pshat is because the Gemara says in Bava Basra, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, Rabbi Yochanan, Miyom Shechar Beis Hamikdash, from the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Nitla Nevuah Min Anavim, the Nevuah was taken away from the prophets, V'nitna L'Shaitin U'L'Tinoikis, and it was given to the Shaitim and the Tinoikis. And the Gemara goes on and tells a story of where you find the Shaitim had Nevuah and where you find that the Tinoikis had Nevuah. Zok the Teres Chaim, it's Nevuah in the Gemara that from the time that Nevuah was taken away, where did the Nevuah go? It didn't leave this world. It stayed on planet Earth. It's sitting now, amongst others, by the Tinoikis. The reason it's mutter to do a psaikli psukech, because it's not nichush. It's not being ma'inain. This is not ma'isa oiva yadoini. It's nevuah. Just like once upon a time you were allowed to go to the Navi, so today you're allowed to go to the Tinoikis, based on the Gemara Bava Basra, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, of Nitla Nevuah and Anavim, V'nitna L'Tinoikis. The reason it's mutter to say a psaikli psukech is because we touch up that what the Tinoik is telling you right now is actually a nevuah. Teres Chaim doesn't say it, but it's pashut. Who's the Baal Memra over here in Bava Basra, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Miyam Shechar Beis Hamikdash, Nitla Nevuah Min Anavim, V'nitna L'Shaitim. This is Rabbi Yochanan L'Shitasai. Rabbi Yochanan L'Shitasai. In Bava Basra Yud Beis Amud Beis that said, Miyam Shechar Beis Hamikdash, Nevuah was given to the Tinoikis. That's why in Chulin Tzadikei Amud Beis, Rabbi Yochanan's midah is that he is someone that says psaikli psukech. Why is he saying psaikli psukech? He's badik biyanuka. It's because he holds it's nevuah, and to the extent that it's nevuah, there's nothing wrong halachically with going ahead and doing that. That's the second ara. The third ara is Shmuel badik b'sifra. Shmuel used to be badik with a sefer. So what does it mean that Shmuel was badik b'sifra? So if you look in the Mefarshei Gemara, it's some form of what we know as a Geirul Hagra. Reading from the Chidah in his Shiurei Bracha, the side of the Birkei Yosef, and this is on that Simin, Yeridei Simin Kuf Ayin Tes. Kasa Marikash, nearly, the Lekuli Alma Mutal of Tayach B'Torah, Lirois HaPasik HaOila. Everybody holds that in the world of superstition, what you are and what you are not allowed to do, you're allowed to open up a Sefer Torah to see what pasuk you're going to bump into, to know what to do. Ki hi chayenu. As a matter of fact, we live on that. This is something that we're allowed to do, meaning Torah is chayenu, and this is included in the fact that Torah is chayenu. I'm skipping a little bit. Umatzasi bekuntra, says the Chidah, ksivas yad, la Rav Rebelio hakoyin zechroinu levracha bal shevet musar, shakasav v'zel l'shoynoi, ki balti meraboisai, kishayu roitzim lasis ezadavar. I was makabel from my rabbis. When they wanted to do something, v'hayu misupakim, im lasoisay im lav, hayu noitlen chumish, oy arba ve'esrim, they would take a chumish or a Tanakh, they would open it up. They would look at the first line of the Chumash and the Tanakh to see what pasuk they found. And based on what they saw, and that's what they did. And what emerged is that they would be messiahs with the Torah. And this is something that you're allowed to do. In fact, Chazal say you're supposed to be noitel eitzim in Torah. Said Rabbi Leo HaKohen the Baal Sheva said this is what Chazal meant. What they meant was you open up a Sefer Torah, you open up a Chumash, you could open up a Tanakh. Look at the first pasuk on the first line, and whatever that pasuk is, you're going to know kadas malasis. That's going to give you insight on what to do, and this is something that's mutter. In fact, the Chidah quotes the Marikash that said ki chayenu. This is mamish the way we go about our geschäft. Of course, the makar to this idea is Shmuel's memra. Shmuel badak b'sifra. Rabbi Yochanan was badik b'yanuka. Shmuel was badik b'sifra. The Ramah brings Rabbi Yochanan badik b'yanuka. He doesn't bring Shmuel badik b'sifra. But at the same time, this is what the Chidah is commenting. He's bringing from Kadmoinim this inyan that just like we paskin, you're allowed to go to a child and say psaikli psukech. Teres Chaim was masber. It's an inyan of nevuah. There's also a concept of badik b'sifra. You're allowed to open up a sefer Geirul Hagra style, and you're allowed to go and try to figure out what you should do. The truth is, this idea of Shmuel Badik B'Sifra permeates the Torah of the Heilig Chassam Sofer. I think it's kedai to talk about it for 1 second. The pasuk in Parsha Shoftim says, "V'hoya kishiftoi al kisei mamlachtoi v'kasav leis mishtatayr." So we know that every yid has a mitzvah to write a sefer Torah. V'ata kisvul chemes hashira azois. It's mitzvah's taryag. It's the 613th mitzvah in the Torah. But the Torah says that the melech, the king, in addition to the fact that he has an obligation to have a sefer Torah like every Jew did, he had to have his own sefer Torah. He had to have a second sefer Torah. V'hoya kishiftoi al kisei mamlachtoi. When this person is going to become king, v'kasav leis mishnah Torah v'chulu, and the pasuk includes v'hoysei imai v'kara by kol yemei chayav. It should be with him, and he should read from it throughout his entire life. Just to read one paragraph from the Heilig Chassam Sofer, Pirish. Ki kishe Yisrael berum hamaylos. He says when Klal Yisrael is berum hamaylo, Azai Malcolm Yoshev al Kisei Hashem. Then the king sits on the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Umeshamesh beruach HaKodesh, and he uses Ruach HaKodesh, v'urim v'tumim, and he is the Urim v'tumim, al piv yetzu v'yavoy. Right? In a perfect world, the way the Melech Yisrael used to operate was Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, Al Pi Navi, Al Pi Urim V'Tumim. And by the way, the Marmakim for this is Brachas Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Right? Every morning they used to come to David HaMelech and they would tell him that Amcha Yisrael Tzrichim Parnasa. Right? And he would say, go collect money. And then they would say, what do you mean collect money? We've tried this yesterday. We tried this the day before. Right? Ein HaKoimetz Maspiyas Ha'ariv, Ein HaBur Mismal B'Chuyasa, the famous Gemara. Miyad the Gemara says they were yoyetz with the Urim V'Tumim and Achi Teufel, and all the Yoyetzim and all the Nevi'im would engage and they would get involved in assisting David HaMelech. Says the Heilig Chassam Sofer, that's the way it was when the king was sitting al Kisei Hashem, when it was Shanim Kitikunam, when Yisrael was Oitzim Ritzayin Shalmakim, in that world of David HaMelech. That's the way the king knew what to do. He did it al Pi Nevuah. He did it al Pi Urim V'Tumim, stating that Amna Besur Kolela. But when all of those things were removed, when the Yidden were not in the Madrega anymore, where they have Nevuah, when they don't have the Urim V'Tumim anymore, at that point, the king is no longer sitting on the Kisei Hashem Zok Chassam Sofer, but Nikra Kisei Mamlachtoi. He's now al Kisei Mamlachtoi. So v'hoyu kishiftoi Zok Chassam Sofer al Kisei Mamlachtoi. It's like he's a king. I'm a king of a country, just like other countries have kings. It's not the Kisei Hashem. It's not on that Madrega anymore. It's only Kisei Mamlachtoi. Omi mikol makom amru Chazal. Shmuel Badik Besifra, Chulin Dav Tzadik Heo Mibeis. V'chein hoya gam came b'malchi Yisrael aksherim l'shalei zachal l'ruach hakodesh badku Besifra v'Hashem onam v'zeu pirish v'hoya kishiftei al kisei mamlachtoi v'kasav leis mishatayr should write a separate Sefer Torah. And when he's going to have that Sefer Torah, you know what he's going to do with it? Kara by kol yemei chayav pirish b'Sefer Torah yikra kol koiroi shal yemei chayav. As Akol Yimtze B'Sefer Torah. This king is going to want to know how to go about his business. And he's not sitting al Kisei Hashem. So he's not tapped into Nevuah. He doesn't have Urim V'Tumim. He's only al Kisei Mamlachtoi. So what am I supposed to do? I'm a king. I'm running a Jewish Medina. How am I supposed to know how to go about my business? The answer is you should have a Sefer Torah. V'hoiso imay, it should be with you. V'kara by kol yemei chayav. Not v'kara by kol yemei chayav. You should read from it your whole life. V'kara by kol yemei chayav. You will read in it all the happenings of your life. Everything that's negeya you, everything that's negeya how you have to control and run this country is going to be in the Torah. V'hoisa imay v'kara by kol yemei chayav. This is the way the Heilig Chassam Sofer teaches in Torah's Moshe over here in Parsha Shoftim. The truth is, Divrei Chassam Sofer ki yodua are aniyim b'makom echad and the ashirim b'makom acher. In Chassam Sofer al Torah, and this is at the very, very end of the Sefer, it's in the Likutim, it's on page Kuf Nun Zayin. The Chassam Sofer also talks about this Indian, and he's marchiv on it a little bit. He starts with a pasuk in Tehillim. It's in Kapitel Kuf Yotes. The pasuk says, Gam eidoisecha shashuai anshe yatzasi. The Torah was shashuai, it was anshe yatzasi. Says the Chassam Sofer. The Torah was anshe yatzasi. What does that mean? It means I used to be noitel eitzah from the Torah. He said David HaMelech understood that sometimes when he needed an eitzah, even though David HaMelech had nevuah and he had Urim V'Tumim, but the Torah itself was anshe atzasi. It gave him eitzahs. It was miyayitzim. It explained to him sometimes how you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. V'hinei. inside. Kavanas Anshe Atzasi Pirish Al Derech Psoikli Psukech Oy Shmuel Badik Besifra V'Kasafti B'Makam Achar Shezeu Pirish V'Hoysa Imay V'Karabay Kol Yemei Chayav Shebesei Torah Yikra Kol Kairos Yemei Chayav, that through learning Torah you're going to see your whole life. Al Derech Shmuel Badik Besifra V'Hainu Anshe Asasi. That's what it means. The Torah gave me eitzes. Shenimlach Besifra. That's the way Shmuel did it. Oy Biyanuka, the way Rabbi Yechon did it. Rabbi Yechon is also being baidik in the Torah. Psoikli Psukech is a pusik in the Torah. Miyo, Zok Tech Samsach. Listen to these words. Listen to these words. Ein ze chiddush kol kach. It's not such a chiddush. Shmuel Badik Besifra. It's not such a chiddush. Davi Kain Gairol. It's a little heebie-jeebie. Okay, I'm showing you heard from heebie-jeebie. It's not such a chiddush. Avol yoyse nifla. You know what's more nifladik? Ki kama pamim bederech shashui dairaisa. Beloy kavanas mischaven. Because so often when a person is just enjoying Torah, he's bederech shashui dairaisa. Beloy kavanas miskaven. He's a mesasik ba'alma in the pleasures of the Torah. Moitze b'shiyura d'yoyma. He's going to find in the shiyura d'yoyma, or the dafa yoyma. He's going to find in the shiyura d'yoyma. Oy beparshas hashavua me'ena mu'ura shalai. He's going to find something that's relevant to him. Va'agoyin ha'chavis yor. Zoktich sam soifer the chavis yor. Kitchehirer eich yikra shem sifroi. He was thinking how he should write his sefer. So the great chavis yor, he wanted to write a shayl shuvas chavis yor, his magnum opus, and he was debating in his head, what he should name his sefer? V'shmoi hoyo yar. This is the words of the Chassam Sofer. His name was Yar. V'ziknasai shegidlasai. And his grandmother that raised him Shma Chava. Her name was Chava. And he was thinking, you know what, maybe I should have something that has my name, my grandmother's name, and he wasn't sure. V'karul Torah. And that day they call him up to the Sefer Torah, and he's standing by the bima together with the Baal Korah. V'karul Lufanav, v'yikra oisam Chavis Yair ad hayoym hazeh. And he said, Simona Milsi, that's what I should name my Sefer. I'm Yair, my Baba is Chava, and he named his Sefer Chavis Yair. V'kosab Agois Maimoni. And then the Chassam Sofer says, he saw from Agois Maimoni. U'maisle beis yois b'der simon pei beis. And the beis yois brings in a Yerideh simon pei beis. Gisha asak ri ba'ofis, when the ri was learning the sugi of ofis, Koran echad babi yeshivasai. A bird, this Koran, came, and it literally sat next to him. Ubad kuwaisai, and he was biting it. Umatzai kurkabanai niklaf, and he saw the kurkaban was niklaf. And he was able to understand the halacha. When we went through the grasshopper raid bite, and we told the story of Reb Chaim and the story of the Baal Mechaber Sefer Stei Yitzchak. So Yedidi, Reb Tzvi Schlesinger, he sent me immediately this Chassam Sofer. It's a Mefurish Beis Yosef, Kisha Asak Riba Oifis, that all of a sudden he was Eicha to the Seif. And then the Chassam Sofer fears Eis, he needed some bold letters. He says things like this happen every single day. And Zok the Chassam Sofer, that to me is much more nifladik. Shmuel Badik Besifra, when he goes Bekavan, he says, let me open up a Sefer Torah and let me see what's going on over here. That's not such a Chiddush. That's not such a Chiddush. It's Ke'en Gairol. Shouldn't you heard from a Gairol. But the fact that you're learning the Daf, and pumped all of a sudden something you just learned has a shaykhis to your life, something that's going on in the world, something that's negated to you, that's nifladik. That's incredible. Or it's something in the Parshas HaShavua, or the Chavis Yarut's Mesupik, and he's not 100% sure what to name his sefer, and all of a sudden he gets up and he says, oh, my name is Yar, my grandmother's name was Chava, I'm so maketoifter because she raised me. By the way, in the Hakdama to the Chavis Yar, so the Chavis Yar, he tells the story of why he named the sefer Chavis Yar. Incidentally, I saw a Moshe Shlomiak, Hagoyin, Bal Oitzvus Chassam Sofer. He has a nisfach in the back of Petuchei Choisam on this line in the Chassam Sofer with the Chavis Yar, and he actually asks as a ha'ara, because the Chavis Yar has a whole lot of riches in the Hakdama. He even talks about, is it appropriate to maybe name a sefer after a woman? I mean, it's his grandmother, but he's throwing the name Chava into the name of a sefer, and he says, it doesn't bother me. He said, because the great Goy in the Baal Megillas Esther, that's the Pirush on the side of the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he was one of the Sfardish Goyim, and the Baal Megillas Esther writes that he's naming the Sefer Megillas Esther because his mother's name was Esther. And Rav Moshe Shlomiak was Mitzayin also that the Tzlach, the Noid of Yehuda, named this Sefer Tzion L'Nefesh Chaya. That's why it's called Tzlach. Tzion Nefesh Chaya, because his mother's name was Chaya, and he was giving a dedication to his mother. We've mentioned Rav Margolis' Sefer Nefesh Chaya that he wrote in Erechaim was dedicated to his first wife, whose also name was Chaya. But there's a lot of Marmakoimus for this. But the bottom line is he doesn't bring the story. He does not in the Hakdam bring the story that he was called up for the Torah and they called Chavis Yar. This is a Ara on the Hilchach Chassam Sofer. But the bottom line is that the Chassam Sofer said that The fact that Shmuel was badik besifra when he's doing it bekavana, he said that's not the biggest chiddush in the world. What is a chiddush is that sometimes it just happens. And then the Chassam Sofer fears with a taich. He says that's what David HaMelech said. Gam eidoisecha shashuai anshe atzasi. What does it mean the Torah is anshe atzasi? That I'm noitel eitzer from the Torah. Al derech Shmuel badik besifra, Rabbi Yochanan was badik beyanuka. But you know what the chiddush is? Even when I did it shaloi bekavana. Gam eidoisecha shashuai. I'm just enjoying Torah. I'm just sitting having a geschmack. Oh, but anshe atzasi. Even then it's guiding me and it's telling me what to do. The great ones used to marry what they were learning to what they had going on in their life, and they actually took it as a sign. They took it as a sign. And the Chassam Sofer is teaching us that you don't have to do the Geir Lagra, but there's an idea of even when the Torah is Gam Eidoisecha Shashuai, even then there's a bechina of Anshe Atzasi. I mean, I lost count, but the amount of times we've had in this cycle of Daf Yomi, where things that we were learning and how they coincided with what's going on in the world is staggering. It's already past, I think, what you expect just statistically, analytically to happen just because. It's way, way, way beyond that. It's absolutely fascinating. And this is a real Indian that's very much based on a one line in today's daf. It's something that's based on the Torah, the Chassam Sofer. Incidentally, this Indian, this taich of a Korah by Kol Yimei Chayav, Reb Shimon Sofer brings already in the P'tuchei Chosam. So this made it to the P'tuchei Chosam, which we know were the things that the Chassam Sofer used to always talk about. The things that were Margel B'Pumbe, so much so that Reb Shimon Sofer writes in the Hakdama that any person that sits down to learn the P'tuchei Chosam, if you knew the Tat is not going to see one thing he didn't already hear, kama v'kama pamim, because everything there was moli. This was his whole life. But this was one of the things Chassam Sofer used to always say. V'hoya kishivtei al kisei mamlachtoi v'kasav le'es mishnah haTorah v'isei imay v'kara by kol yimei chayav. Not kara by kol yimei chayav. You should read from it your entire life, but you will read in it your entire life. Everything of your life, any decision you're ever going to have to make, these are things that you're going to be able to find in the Torah. The pasuk says it by the Melech. The Chassam Sofer said it's true for anyone that learns Torah in the richtige Weg. There's an Inyan of Shmuel badik besafra, Rabbi Yochanan badik beyanuka, v'hoise imay v'kara by kol yimei chayav. And even when it's not bekavana, you don't have to have the special Geir Lagra Chumash Tanakh and do it in the right way. Belel Shimurim standing on one foot. The Chassam Sofer said, Gamei doisecha shashuai. Even when you're just enjoying Torah, anshe atzasi, you're going to see the Eibush is going to talk to you through the Torah. Eibush is going to be madrich you. The Eibush is going to give you eitzes. We should be zoicha to have a tam of this, sayav gam eidoisecha shashuai, and to be zoicha to see the oir of the Torah, the guiding light of the Torah. It should be anshe atzasi.